Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live immigration Q&A session. Tonight, we are joined by graduates and international students from institutions across Canada and, of course, internationally and within Canada. Sorry. My name is Han, and I'll be moderating your session tonight. The next slide. It is brought to you by Devant, and the word Devant in French quite literally means to be in front of. We believe that our services and support will bring you in front of the rest of your journey to stay, work, and succeed in Canada. So Devant is an organization tailored specifically to cater to international students. We have expertise of over 60 years of combined work experience in higher education and career development. Just a few housekeeping items that I would like to go over with you. Just some administrative so that, we'll have a really smooth session. All participants have been muted. You should be able to hear via your computer audio device. No need to use your video. The session is being recorded, and please, if you have questions, go into the Q&A section. The function is just for you to introduce yourself and chat, but if you have questions, please type them there because that's where we will be monitoring, and that's where we'll send the questions to Elizabeth. Okay, and for any future sessions or events, please visit our website.
Oh, you're on mute, I think. Somehow we can't hear you.
So I'm going to introduce, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I'm going to introduce to you Elizabeth. She's a leading immigration lawyer, an active advocate of immigration and refugee rights in Canada. She holds a Juris Doctor Law from the University of Toronto and a Bachelor of Arts degree with honors in psychology from Memorial University in Newfoundland. She also holds a Master of Law degree from Osgoode Hall, York University, where she focused on the intersection between immigration and labor and employment law for foreign workers. She has been certified by the Law Society of Ontario as a specialist in citizenship and immigration law, which is a prestigious list of only which approximately 65 lawyers in Canada belong. Welcome, Elizabeth, to our amazing and long-standing Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Han. It's great to be here with you guys. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through some of the basic things that I always go through every session with you guys to make sure you guys stay in status and make sure that you apply for your work permits at the right time. But today what we're going to concentrate on in the latter half of our presentation is if you wanted to start your business in Canada, what are some of the things that you need to keep in mind as international students? What kind of work permits can you apply for, and how does that lead towards permanent residence? Now, as Han has said, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A button, put them in there, and we're going to try to go through as many questions as you have at the end. All right, so let's first talk about extending your status. One of the first things you guys have to know is that if you file an extension of your study permit or your work permit or visitor status before the temporary status expires, you have implied status or maintained status, and you can extend your status and stay in Canada. If you're applying for a work permit and you have a work permit, or your study permit has been completed, we'll talk about that. Then you can work. If you're studying and you apply for a study permit extension, you can study while waiting for the decision to be made. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about is these work permit extension letters that you guys might get in the mail if you're going to apply for your postgrad work permits, or sometimes if you apply for other work permit extensions in Canada. You'll get it through the portal. And on it, it will say, okay, so you are authorized to work, but then it'll put this random date on there, okay? And it says you're authorized to work until a decision is made or until this date, whichever comes first. That is actually quite misleading because it's not that you lose your status on that date if you don't have a decision. You have the legal right and you keep your status until a decision is actually made. That date that they put on that letter is actually just a random date that the system assigns, and it's actually quite meaningless. I think they wanted to put a date on there because you can use it for OHIP, and OHIP might look at the date and just want to extend it to that time. I'm not sure why they put that date, but it's often very confusing for people, and people start to panic if your decision is not made by that date. Don't worry, even if the decision has not been made by that date, you can continue to be in Canada and your status continues until the decision is made. Now, one of the things you do have to understand is you only have implied status if your application was submitted properly. And what I mean by submitting properly is, number one, you filed the right forms. Number two, you paid the right fees. And number three, you actually pressed the button and the system actually submitted your application. If any of those are not done, it's as if you didn't submit it at all. And so then it's as if then you wouldn't have implied status. Okay? Now, if you forgot to extend it, I hope after you have attended this session that none of you will ever forget this. Hope the first thing that you do when you go home is to put that date on your calendar. Make sure you have like 5 reminders of when that extension, that date is there. But maybe you forget, or maybe you get a negative decision on your application. What do you do then? So you do have a second chance in Canada to apply to restore your status 90 days after you have lost status, okay, within 90 days. Now, when you are applying and waiting for your restoration decision to be made, you actually don't have status at that point. So you have to stop studying, stop working until the decision is made. Once you have your study permit or work permit back, you can actually study or work again. But you cannot do that while you're waiting. You can stay in Canada, but you cannot do that while you're waiting. And one last thing is your implied status and your restoration, you lose that if you leave Canada. So if you are, let's say your work permit has already expired and you had filed the work permit before extension before it expired, great. But then before you get your work permit, you leave the country. If you leave the country and then you come back again, you actually don't have implied status and you cannot work until that new work permit is issued. So be very careful about that. All right, studying and working on your study permit. Now, one of the first things you have to understand is you have to actively pursue your studies. Just because you have a study permit does not mean that you can't lose your student status while your study permit is still valid. You lose your status if you're not actively pursuing your studies, meaning, going to class, being enrolled as a student, etc., within 90 days, okay? Now, there are 2 exceptions to the rule. One is the scheduled breaks. That's the breaks that are on the academic calendar that everybody in your program gets, okay? And the authorized leave. Authorized leave are personal to you. So if you have authorized leave, it means that you have sought permission from your school ahead of time to take leave for up to 150 days, so 1 semester, okay? And the school has to give you permission before you can take that leave. If you have that, then you have authorized leave and you won't lose your status. However, when you have authorized leave, you cannot work at all, part-time or full-time, because you're not enrolled as a full-time student at that time, okay? So basically, if you wanted to work while you're studying and you don't have another work permit, I'm not talking about the co-op work permit, I'm talking about a work permit that allows you to work without being a full-time student, okay? Then you can't work at all if you're not enrolled as a full-time student. Once you've completed your studies, you are no longer a student and you have to stop working. So the first instance when you get that notification that you have completed your studies from your school, at that point, you're no longer a student, you have to stop working. The only exception is if you have completed one program and you have enrolled for another program, which starts, within 150 days. So there's just one semester in between. Then you can work in between those programs if you've already been accepted to the second program. Okay, let's talk about the post-grad work permits. So one of the first questions you guys should ask yourself is not just how, but should I apply for a post-grad work permit? Because you can only qualify for a post-grad work permit once in a lifetime, okay? And for most of you guys, it will coincide with the length of the program if it's between 8 months to 2 years. 2 years or more equals a 3-year work permit, and you can combine the programs. Now, one thing I didn't add on this slide is now starting February 15th, all master students, irrespective of how long your program is, you also get a 3-year work permit as well. Okay. And sometimes, if you're only able to get a 1-year work permit, for example, especially given the climate these days, that might not be enough. Some people it could be, but other people it might not be enough for you to get your permanent residence. So you really have to understand your plan. Sometimes even the 3-year work permit may not be enough unless you do specific things. So before you even apply for post-grad work permit, I would highly recommend that you have a consultation to go over your plan. So distance education, it's, now we're beyond the COVID rules now. So right now it's supposed to be less than 50% of your program and to qualify for the post-grad work permit. And very importantly, every semester of your school, except for the last semester, you have to have been a full-time student, okay? So sometimes people say, well, I'm going to fail some of these courses. I might as well just drop out and not have it on my transcript. But if you want to get that post-grad work permit, you better still continue to attend classes. And even if you write your exams and fail, as long as you have that F on your transcript, and that course, it shows that you've attended, then you can still qualify for the post-grad work permit as long as you graduate later on. But if you don't have the full-time course load on your transcript, the officer could very well, and normally they do, deny you the post-grad work permit. Okay, there are 2 exceptions to the rule. One is if you're on authorized leave, so you're taking the entire semester off with the permission of the school. And the final semester, they do allow you to be a part-time, because sometimes students, you might have to make up one course or so in the last semester, and that's okay, but only in the final semester. Now, let's talk about when you should apply for your post-grad work permit. I highly, highly recommend that you guys apply for your post-grad work permit within 90 days of you graduating and you completing your program, not just, getting the convocation. I don't care about that. When you get that first notification that you've completed your program and while your study permit is still valid. Okay, so if your study permit is valid and it expires before your 90 days is up, then the deadline is your study permit. If it expires after your 90 days is up, then 90 days is your deadline. The reason why I say 90 days and not 180 days, which is what the IRCC website says, is in order to be able to work while waiting for your work permit, you have to have a valid study permit. And also, the officers, they were saying that you they want to see that you have a valid study permit in order to qualify for the postgrad work permit. Okay, so just keep that in mind. 90 days, or when your study permit is still valid, that is the best time. Now, let's say you can't apply within 90 days. You could apply for within 180 days, but normally then we file a restoration of status and you can't work until a work permit is issued. Okay, so just wanted to quickly go over the timeline. Let's say you are writing your final exams. Can you work then? Yes, you're a full-time student. You can still work then, okay? Let's say you're waiting for your results. Haven't gotten your results yet. Still a full-time student, can work then. Okay, school has notified you. You've completed your program. Are you a student then? No, you're not. Stop working. Full-time, part-time, anytime, okay? Now, if you submit your postgrad work permit within 90 days of the program and you've completed your study permit and your study permit is still valid at that time, then you can start working full-time at that point. Okay. All right, let's get to the second part of our program today. We're going to talk about entrepreneur paths. I love doing entrepreneur work permits and working with entrepreneurs because I think entrepreneurs are some of the most interesting and very, very not only hardworking but very innovative. And I think we really need to do a lot in this country to encourage entrepreneurs to be able to be in this country. Unfortunately, the government hasn't provided a lot of really good programs and pathways towards permanent residence. So we kind of have to piece the different pieces together to form pathways for permanent residence. But first, I wanted to talk about what self-employment means for immigration. Okay, and the immigration really adopts the tax law definition of self-employment. And so they really look a lot at whether or not someone has a T4 and payroll, first of all. Okay, so if someone has doesn't have a T4, then their implication is most of the time they would conclude that you are self-employed. If you get a T4A, I think, then you're a contractor and not a employee. Okay, but just because you get a T4, I mean, anybody can set up a company and give yourself a T4. That doesn't mean that you're still counted as being not self-employed. Okay, so one of the indices that they look at is, do you own your own tools? If I'm gonna hire someone to paint my house, they're gonna bring their own painting tools. It's their company that I'm hiring them. They're a contractor that way, and they employ themselves. Okay. Do you bill your own clients, right? Do you bill the company, or does that company give you a T4? Okay. So one of the main things as well, we're looking at control. Do you own shareholder, the majority of the shares? That's a big indication, or a large part of the shares. You don't even have to own majority of the shares to be counted as being self-employed for express entry. They look at whether or not you have substantial control over the company. Okay. So when we look at self-employment and express entry, there are a few issues if you choose to be self-employed and open your own business compared to if you're going to be employed by another person's business. So first of all, the main issue is that self-employment does not qualify as Canadian work experience. Okay, so it doesn't qualify for the Canadian experience class to get you into the pool. Of course, you can get into the pool through the federal skilled worker class as well. But most importantly, it does not give you those CRS, Canadian Work Experience points. Like I said, it does count as work experience, though, to qualify you to get into the pool through the federal skilled worker class. Now, one of the things to consider is if you were able to obtain an employer-specific work permit. So you can't do this just on the post-grad work permit, okay? But if you can get an employer-specific work permit, such as significant benefit, entrepreneur work permit, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those kind of work permits, and you were to work in the business for 1 year, then you could be eligible for arranged employment points. It would be 50 points if you were in most occupations, or 200 points if you're in the executive management level, okay? So let's look at the employer-specific work permits for entrepreneurs. One of the work permits that we apply for a lot is for entrepreneurs who are going to, they are going to provide significant benefit to Canada. Well, what kind of significant benefit can they bring? One, they can hire and provide jobs for Canadians. They could, if you're an artist, for example, and you're going to provide significant benefit for, cultural reasons. I had a client who was providing benefits for providing, disabled people with equipment. That's for the health and welfare of Canadians. So we have to talk about a significant benefit, and you have to own at least 50% of the business. Normally, I like to say, 51% of the business, and that you control the business, okay? So that's one of the work permits you can do. Intercompany transferee work permit, we tend to file these a lot for people who already have an existing business overseas, and that business will continue to run while they open up a related company in Canada. It could be a subsidiary, a sister company, a parent company. But the main thing is that these companies, it's companies that are related overseas and in Canada, and the overseas company has to continue to run. I talked about significant benefit work permits for artists. So there's one that we, sometimes if you are doing things that will increase the cultural benefits for Canada, we can apply for a work permit for that. There's the startup visa work permit, and I'm going to talk about the startup visa program. And a startup visa program is a permanent residence program. And in the meantime, while you're working on the business and you're waiting for your permanent residence, you can also get a work permit to allow you to work in the business. The government has said that they want to eventually issue open work permits, but they haven't yet. And so these work permits right now are still employer-specific work permit. They will only allow you to work for your own business. I wanted to touch on the self-employed category for artists. It's also for athletes as well, okay? And these are, this category is a permanent residence application. In order to qualify for this, you have to have at least 2 years of work experience in the last 5 years in cultural activities, either in self-employment or at a world-class level. And it's cultural activities or athletic activities as well, okay? You have to show that you'll make a significant contribution to cultural life in Canada or the athletic community in Canada. And you have to show that you will be able to support yourself in your art or your sport in Canada. If you have all three of this, then this is a category that we may be able to apply for you under the self-employed category. They say 35 points for selection criteria. Almost everyone will have this as long as they have 2 years of work experience. For those who have a master's or PhD in Ontario, you may want to apply under these streams because they don't require job offers. And so, you can apply within 2 years of graduation, no job offer required. When you enter these programs, you shouldn't be looking to study right away. You can study after you get your PR, but they are looking for people who are applying under this program, people who are going to enter into the labor market. Even if you don't have a job yet, you have to be ready to start working. The main thing about this, though, is you can't just put all your eggs in this basket because they are chosen at, there are draws at random times of the year. And the draws, like you're not assured that you're going to be invited to apply. A lot of times they might just invite, you have certain points. It's different from express entry points, but there are certain points for the system. And sometimes they might invite people based on occupation, and those points. So especially in the master stream, I find PhD stream, most people might be invited, but the master stream, you can be in the pool for up to a year, and then if you're not selected, you're kicked out of the pool. And it depends on your circumstances. Many people are not invited through the master stream. Okay. So then let's talk about the startup visa program. The startup visa program is something where up to 5 founders can apply together to start a business. So it could be you and up to 4 other people. Now, sometimes people say, oh, I have a Canadian friend who has a business and I want to start together with him. No, we're not looking at the founders that we're talking about are not the Canadians. The founders we're talking about are the people who all want to apply together under this program. So you can have people, for example, back in your home country, or other people in Canada who are also looking to get permanent residence. Okay. Now, each of the founders have to own at least 10% of the company, and all of the founders together have to have at least majority shares or at least 50% of the business. Most importantly, the business has to be accepted by a designated organization. Incubator, angel investor group, venture capital group, and these are organizations that have been selected and are on a list by the government. And each founder must be able and willing to manage the business. This is not a passive investment scheme. Every person has to show that they're able and willing to do it. And the best indication of that is if you're already working and managing the business. Like I said, you can get a work permit to work on the business before, while you're waiting for your permanent residence. The permanent residence for this, the timeline has shortened. We're looking at maybe getting, the officers starting to look at your applications within around a year and a half or so after it's submitted. And normally, right now, under 2 years, you can get your permanent residence. Each of the founders also have to have pass the CLB 5 level for each skill level for your language skills as well. Okay. So those are some of the pathways towards for entrepreneurs if you want to start your own business. But it's very important to plan your next steps, right? You have to understand which way you're going to go. And I will tell you, especially for entrepreneurs, there's not one size that fits all. You really want to make sure that you understand which way works for yourself. Maybe you start a business on the side and you go and work for a bit, someone else and get your points for work experience. Maybe you don't need to do that. Maybe we apply for an entrepreneur work permit. Maybe we just start a visa. You really need to understand for yourself. And once you go through the entrepreneur route, and if you're going to depend on the fact that you're going to have a business in order to immigrate, then that corporate structure that's set up has to align with the immigration path. Most corporate lawyers don't really understand immigration law. And so it's very important, and tax lawyers, etc., they don't really understand what we need for immigration, what you need for your plan. So it's very important for us to speak with your corporate lawyers and for us to, make a plan together as to not only how best to set up your corporate structure so that it aligns with your needs on the business side and the tax side, but also to make sure that you can immigrate and stay in the country as well. Very importantly, if we're going down this route, knowing what you need to keep as records is essential. So don't just hire an immigration lawyer at the end of it, oh, I set up a business, I ran my business for a year. Okay, now can you help me? Because there could have been a lot of things. For example, you didn't file the right taxes, you didn't set up the structure that you didn't do that won't qualify you for the pathway that you need to go. If you want to start doing this, go and get a consultation as early as possible. And if you were to come and see me, we would talk about the pathway and set up your structure from the beginning, talk with your corporate lawyer from the beginning so that we can help you. Maybe you can submit the application after a year only, or maybe you can submit it right away. But whichever way it is, you have to get proper advice very early on, okay? One of the key things is also for a lot of these things is to have a good business plan. A lot of you guys may, study how to do a business plan in business school, but it's not necessarily what we're looking for immigration. For immigration, we need to have the different elements specified there. We need to show that you have the financial capability to sustain yourself. We need to show that you have significant benefits to Canada. The structure is correct structure, etc. Okay. And hire a good immigration lawyer. Get started on your application as early as possible. All right. So now let's get to the questions. By the way, this is our information if you wanted to contact us and set up a consultation. Let us know you're coming from Devant, so we'll give you the discounted rate. It's $100 for the initial consultation fee. And also this is our YouTube and not YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn. We are doing a lot of videos for social media. And you might find some of them useful for yourself. Okay.
And how they can, this is how they can contact you to book an appointment.
That's right. Yeah.
Wonderful. So we have a lot of questions as usual. So I'll go with the first one. Alish Kumar writes, I have submitted my work permit last year in September, but still I didn't get any information. Even I raised 2 times web form and said they are processing my application. I guess this person requested. What happened? Today I received correspondent letter regarding the validity of biometric. Also, my applied status is expired March the 17th soon. What should I do? They can give me again any applied letter? I'm not.
Okay. So, right. So this letter is what I was talking about before. I told you guys, they give you this random date that they put in this letter saying that your status is only until this date or until you get a decision. That actually is not right. You have the legal ability to stay in the country until a decision is made, not some random date on the letter. Okay, it actually says on the website, IRCC website, to ignore that if you didn't get a decision. We did a YouTube video that's coming out on our social media. You guys can check it out where I talk about this as well. By the way, if you guys have that biometrics collection letter, normally they issue that very soon before you get a decision. So hopefully, since you got the biometrics collection letter, you should get that maybe today, tomorrow, or the day after the decision. Okay.
What a way to make a person nervous to get that letter and randomly choose a date that doesn't make any.
Yes, it's one of my pet peeves. It really bothers me. Yeah.
Yeah. Next question on the Q&A chat function, area. Sorry, the Q&A section. Hi, I'm an international student with prior experience in accounting, pursuing supply chain management at Loyalist. I have my spouse with me in dependent visa, who is a civil engineer with 10 years experience and working as a machine operator. Could you please assist us the best pathway to PR as per our profile in the current scenario?
Right. So you guys have to come for a consultation, and then we can go through your situation. Sometimes it just depends on a lot of situations, how old are you? What is your experience? Do you have a job offer? If you're from certain countries, for example, with a free trade agreement, we might be able to get a work permit based on that, and the list goes on. So do come for a consultation and we can figure out that path for you.
And remember to say you're from Devant to get the discount.
Yes, get the discount.
Maria asked, I'm currently on an open work permit in Canada. I'm currently studying trading, Forex trading, and I'm planning to grow my account this year. Can I apply for PR with this if I actually make a significant amount in it?
Yeah, no, this is more, when we're talking about entrepreneur work permits, we're talking about significant benefits to Canada where you open up a business, not just something where you're trading yourself for yourself. If you're trading for others and you open up a whole trading company, that might be another thing. So do come and chat with us and we can make a plan for you.
Mara writes, when applying for extension for the postgraduate work permit due to passport expiration, can I apply online?
So this is a very interesting question. On the website, it says that you should apply by paper, which I don't understand why they say that. I have seen it where people applied online and they have received the new work permit. But if you want it to be extra safe, you can follow what they say on the website and apply by paper and get your work permit extended that way.
Old-fashioned way paper.
I don't understand why they say that, but yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Alex writes, I've submitted my profile for express entry, unsure what study in Canada based on an award that required them to go back to their home country means. Do you know what this?
Sometimes there are programs for certain people where part of the conditions of for example, they received a scholarship to come to Canada, where part of the conditions is that they are to go back to their home country. And so if you're part of those programs, you may not qualify for the points that you need for express entry, certain points that you need for express entry.
Alex asks the same thing. Is 460 a good CRS score?
Oh, that really depends. Right now, the last draw was 531, but that was a general draw. If you have other, if you have, for example, if you're a healthcare worker, or if you, certain occupations and francophones will have special draws. But we'll need to take a look at your circumstances. But in general, if it's a general draw and you have to rely on the general draw, then express entry may not be for you, given that the points are so high right now.
And thank you everyone for typing in your questions in the Q&A section, which is at the very bottom in the middle that says Q&A. This is where you type in your questions. We're going through them one by one. Naeen asks, I completed my studies in December. I had previously applied for a study work permit extension and was granted until the end of March of 2024. I'm presently seeking work. Can I apply for a visitor record to extend my study permit to buy time until I get a job? How long do they usually grant the visitor record for?
So you want to make sure if you want to get a post-grad work permit and you can work once you find a job, you want to make sure that you apply while you still have your study permit that's valid. And to apply within 90 days so that you can start work as soon as you can, okay? So make sure you don't bypass that deadline. If you apply for a visitor extension, then you may not be eligible for a work permit, the postgrad work permit afterwards. So do come and talk to us. And, maybe if you, at least get that postgrad work where you get 3 years and you can try to find a job that way. Also, they issue the postgrad work permit normally 3 years from the date that the officer gets to your application. So if the officer gets to your application in 3 or 4 months, you get it from 3 or 4 months afterwards. But you can work while waiting for your work permit as long as you submit your postgrad work permit in time.
Shiying asks, can I work maximum of 30 hours after April? I'm on my last term studies by then.
So you can work after April. If the rules are not extended, then you can work according to the old rules, which is 20 hours a week off campus while you are studying, and full-time when you're on scheduled break. If you are on campus, you can work full-time. And you can do full-time on campus, part-time off campus. I don't know when you can actually study, but it's allowed.
Okay, so I guess, yeah, it depends on where this person's studying, if they're still in their studying phase. Okay. Where they apply for a job, in campus, out campus. Is that right?
If it's off campus, we're going to go to the regular hours of 20 hours a week.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Eileen asks, I'm a student and I finished my diploma in April. In order to renew my husband's work permit, should I have 3 pay slips in a job of any knock, or is it knock 0, 1, 2, 3?
Okay, so they changed the rules. It used to be that in order for your spouse to get a spousal work permit with you on a postgrad, you had to have a high-skilled job. They changed the rules so you can be in any job. Any job offer is okay now for your spouse to get a work permit.
So it doesn't have to be a specific
It doesn't
knock.
have to be high-skilled anymore. Yeah.
Great. Eisen writes, for Iranian policy, number 1, how can I change my status to open work permit and still have my student permit? Maybe we do one by one, or did you want me to read all questions?
Right. So you can still apply for a work permit under the Iranian policy before the deadline, even if you have a study permit. You can still do that. So you can hold both a work permit and a study permit at the same time. And that work permit, the Iranian work permit, will allow you to work full-time, irrespective of, after April, for example.
If I change mine to open work permit, do I lose the chance to get a postgraduate work permit?
You can still qualify for postgrad work permit after you finish your studies. And you can still apply for the postgrad work as long as you qualify for the postgrad work permit.
Thank you. Anonymous writes, can you explain why we can't work full-time in our last semester?
Well, you can't work full-time in your last semester because you're still a student. And based on your study permit, you can only work full-time during your scheduled break. But you can work part-time even if you have you're a part-time student in the last semester.
Okay. If you were not paid while working with the company, what if you were not paid while working with
the company? Is that work? The problem is that the definition of work in Canada, which requires a work permit or requires authorization to work, is not defined on whether or not someone is paid. It's defined on whether or not your job competes with the labor market. So for example, if I was working as a waitress and I was just volunteering, meaning I'm not really getting paid at all, I'm still taking away that job from a person who would normally get paid as a waitress. Okay. On the other hand, if I am candy striping and I'm working as a volunteer at a hospital where everybody else is volunteering in whether or not they're Canadians or permanent residents, this job is a volunteer work. That's okay, because I'm not taking a job away from a Canadian. Okay, so it really depends on whether or not that job would normally be paid. And so you can't necessarily say, even for example, internships that are normally should be paid, the job is normally paid, you can't necessarily say, oh, I'm just volunteering for that. If you're going to volunteer such that you don't need a work permit, it has to be something that normally it's a volunteer job.
It's not competing with another job or taking away another job. Okay.
From a Canadian, yeah.
I said, is postgraduate work permit given to special majors? Is there any change in giving the work permit decision laws in recent years?
Well, there was a change a couple weeks ago about the masters. So in masters, if you do a master's, you can get a 3-year work permit, irrespective of how long your program is. Other than that, it doesn't matter which major it is. It depends on the program. If it's from a public university or college. And there was a special change where before there were these public-private partnerships, the PPP, where you get a degree, you get a degree from, for example, a public college, but you actually went to study in the private college's campus. That's going to no longer be allowed for students who are attending these programs after September of this year. So just be aware of that. But if you're attending a public college or university, as long as it's not an ESL sort of program, it's an actual program where you get a degree or certificate or diploma, then that kind of program you should be able to get your postgraduate permit.
Right. No special majors. Okay. Israel writes, I want to ask if the new rules apply for students that already enrolled in 2023 program in college with advanced diploma and earning 3 years work permit. Do you know that?
What kind of company that let you apply for what should it? Okay. So these are a lot of questions that you need to come for a consultation. So we can provide you with a plan for your situation. I think that's what my answer would be. Yeah.
I think the last one is, can you repeat when we need to apply for a postgraduate and rules to work as a part-time student?
So you can work as a part-time student when off campus, when you are enrolled as a full-time student and you're attending classes. In scheduled breaks, you can work full-time. When you get the confirmation that you have completed your program, at that point, IRCC says you are no longer a student because you've finished your program. So at that point, you can't work part-time, full-time at all. You apply for your postgrad work permit, keep the deadline in your mind. 90 days after you receive that first indication you completed your program, and when your study permit is still valid. Okay, whichever comes first, that's your deadline. Keep that in mind, and then you can start working while waiting for your postgrad work permit to be decided.
Great. Ian writes, what pathways does not require a job offer? Because we just talked about the and if we apply for a nomination for a province in Ontario, how long does it usually take in the time frame before your decision gets made based on your experience?
So we talked a lot about programs like the master's and PhD stream that does not require a job offer. And the other ones are ways where you would create your own work, how you can apply as your own boss. Okay. Otherwise, most programs do require you to have work experience in Canada or a job offer, or, they look at your points. For most people right now, if you didn't work in Canada for a year or you don't have arranged employment, it's going to be quite difficult to get through enough points with express entry. Depending on your occupation, some people might still be able to do that, but it could be difficult. And the time frame for OINP, it's hard to say. 3 months normally was what it was before, but I do find that a lot of times, sometimes their processing time has been stretching a little bit these days. But normally around 3 months or so.
Okay, thank you. Alish Kumar says, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Shelley writes, if I'm working during my postgraduate work permit, having a skilled job at a company, my postgraduate work permit is about to expire in 3 months. I have applied for Express Entry Pool PR application. Can I apply for the BOWP Bridging Open Work Permit? The Bridging Open Work
So
Permit.
if you have received an invitation to apply, just because you enter yourself into the pool does not mean you have applied, okay?
Right.
But if you have received an invitation to apply, you've submitted your application, then you would qualify for the bridging work permit. But it's only after you've received the invitation that you qualify for the bridging work.
Okay, thank you. Based on my last question, I don't know if we have his last, do I lose my permanent resident chance if I have both open work permit and study permit?
No, I wouldn't think so, but do come and we can talk about what route to do. This one, I think, was a Iranian work permit question before. Yeah.
Noella writes, what are my chances of getting PR with a bachelor's, Canadian postgraduate degree, and a CLB 7 in French, but no Canadian experience and only 1 year left in work permit?
You know, if you have French, there are a lot of things we can do with that. French speakers, you may be able to qualify even if you have 1 year work experience outside of Canada for permanent residence. If you don't have enough work experience, if you have a job offer that is any job offer of any NOC code that is outside of Quebec, we can get you a work permit that's employer specific. And all the employer has to do is register the job on the employer portal. It's called a francophone work permit. So if you're good in French, then there's a lot of pathways.
Awesome. Great skill to have.
Yeah.
Ian writes, if you're a healthcare worker, but you haven't practiced for a long time, what would you suggest would be the best route for this person for their PR application?
So we'll have to talk about that. There are a lot of routes right now for healthcare workers through the category-based draws, through OIMPs. You do have to qualify and get into the pools and for that. But yeah, there are quite a lot of routes for healthcare workers right now.
Call for a consultation. Shade writes, I did not get the full length of my postgraduate work permit because of the expiration date on my passport. Can I apply for an extension? Also, I've completed 1 year of working already.
Yes, you can. You can apply to extend it based on, for the full 3 years if you present your new passport.
Alex writes, following the previous question, I studied, have a master's with a scholarship that required me to go back to my country for 5 months. Does that apply to go back home country after graduation? If I select yes, I get 0 CRS points for Canadian education. So I'm unsure what to select.
It's very difficult for me to know without further information. Come for a consult, we'll take a look.
Great. Is it advisable to put application? Oh, I think this person didn't finish the question. So I'll go into the next one. Clara writes, I've already finished my study and I have had my postgraduate work permit. I started working last June 2023 as full-time. When is the best time to apply for PR?
It really will depend on your circumstances. Come for a consult.
Okay. Any PR pathways for foreign PhD graduates?
You get points for express entry, but other than that, you can, if you were able to get, what's it called? The postdoc positions in the universities. You can get a work permit without an LMIA as a postdoc. And then we can look at possibilities for you to do that as well and get you on the pathway. If you don't want to do that and you have other job offers, etc., we'll have to talk about that.
History. Christina writes, my postgraduate permit expires next year and I'm currently applying for PR. What happens if my work permit expires before I get an answer for a PR?
So it depends. If you have, for example, received the invitation to apply for express entry, you can get a bridging work permit. If you have a provincial nomination, then you may be able to apply for a work permit based on the provincial nomination, or some of them, you can get a bridging open work permit once you have the AOR. So it really depends on which stage you are at and what kind of permanent residence you've applied for.
Offer consultation.
Yeah.
Ian writes, if I'm on a postgraduate permit, is it okay to accept LMIA? Like change from open to closed work permit?
Well, you can get a closed work permit. I don't know, what your circumstances are, whether or not you would want to get a closed work permit. With the LMIA work permit, you could be able to get ranged employment points, which is an advantage. So we are applying for a lot of LMIA work permits for students with postgrad work permits, which will give you an advantage. Sometimes for express entry if you needed those points. But it really depends on each person's circumstances.
Nathan, I'm first semester student in 1-year course. I heard that even 1-year courses will soon have 3-year stay back. Is it true? Will it benefit me or do I have to take another course? Do you understand the
stay back is?
Me
So the master's program and master students, even with 1 year, you get a grad work permit with master students, but everybody else is still the same rules as before. 1 year study equals a 1 year work permit. 1 year work study plus another 1 year study could equal to a 3-year work permit.
Okay, thank you. Should my spouse in OWP stop working when I receive my graduation documents? Example, I received my documents May 30th, but my spouse's work expires July 30th.
Right.
When should he stop working?
Okay, so your spouse their status is dependent on their own open work permit. So even though they got their work permit based on your study permit, for example, their status does not expire like yours does after 90 days. Their status is based on their work permit. So they can continue to work until their work permit expires in July 30th. And then if they file the extension, they can have implied status and continue to work.
Well, thank you for that. Last question of the night. Can I ask for 4 months study work permit extension when my graduation is in July and my current study permit expires in April? Is it beneficial in any way that I'm buying some time from my IRCC before applying for a postgraduate work permit?
So if your study permit expires before you actually finish your program, then you should apply to extend your program. Sometimes, let's say you finish in April and you only get a study permit until the end of April. You can also apply for an extension because you're saying, I don't have time to apply for my postgrad work permit. It's supposed to be valid for 90 days after, like 3 months after you've completed your program, but sometimes the officers forget and they just issue it to the end of the program date. And you can apply to extend it to allow you to have some time. But let's say they give it to you until May, and then you want to apply for a study permit extension. You can apply for the study permit extension, but whether or not they would issue to it is one question. And you can't really work while waiting for your postgrad work permit on implied status. Remember, I had said if you applied for your postgrad work permit while your study permit is still valid, and within 90 days you can work while waiting for your postgrad work permit. Well, that's if your study permit is still valid. If your study permit is not valid, and you don't have a valid study permit, and you're waiting, you apply to implied status, you can do that and you can get your work permit, but you can't start working until you get your study permit back. And then you can start working while waiting for the work permit.
I hope that answers for the
I
anonymous.
don't know if that's it. It's kind of confusing, but yeah, just keep that rule in mind. When your current study permit is valid and within 90 days, apply then. If your current study permit is not going to be valid by the time your program completion, go and apply for the extension of your study permit right away, because you can only start working while waiting for your work permit if you have a valid study permit at the time of application. Yeah.
And then again, when in doubt, please make sure you reach out to Elizabeth. Here is her contact information in the front here. Follow her on LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. So thank you again, Elizabeth. Everyone, please look out for future immigration Q&A sessions, because Elizabeth will be back and you can ask more of your questions then. Thank you, Elizabeth, as always.
Thank you guys so much. It's great to be here. And thank you so much, Han, for hosting. And thank you for all your questions.
Okay. Have a good night, everyone.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.